Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Wisco Whiskey Review. My name's Jeff, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Early Times Bottled and Bond. Now, this is a straight Kentucky bourbon owned by the Brown-Forman Company. Now, if you know them, you'll know that they're a parent company to such big brands as Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, and Old Forester. Now, to get into this a little bit, if you don't know what bottled and bond means, it just means it's 100 proof. It's got to be aged at least 4 years by one distiller in one distilling season in a government bonded warehouse. I think that's all the main points. If I missed any, I apologize, but it's one of the more scrutinized and kind of, tightly guarded categories in bourbon. It just means that you know all of those things to be true, and it's kind of a seal of approval of good quality bourbon in the market, especially way back in the day when a lot of distillers were doing some shady things. So to get into the history of Early Times, it was started way back in the day by John Henry Beam. His nickname was Jack. Now, this happened to be Jim Beam's nephew. Now, Jack Beam left his father's distillery at the age of 21 to create his own, and Early Times was born. Now, unfortunately, he passed away in 1915, but luckily, Brown-Forman bought the company and bought the rights to the name in 1923 and revived the brand. Now, at one point, Early Times Bottled and Bond was the #1 selling whiskey in America, which is pretty huge when you think about all the other big names such as Jack Daniel's, Jim Beam, and you name it. Back then, there would have been maybe not quite as many options as today, but there were still some big hitters. So for this to be the #1 whiskey was sort of a big deal. Now, in the 70s and 80s, things turned a bit rocky as the bourbon industry didn't fare too well, and Early Times at that point was kind of degraded down to a blended bourbon. Since then, I believe it was in 2017, they brought Early Times back and made the Bottled and Bond version again. Now, this was a completely revitalized version of Early Times that they wanted to bring back to kind of hark back to the times before when they were making really good quality bourbon. So I've kind of gone over some of the stats already for this one. The only other thing I'll say is that the mash bill is 79% corn, 11% rye, and 10% malted barley. So that's kind of a lower rye mash bill when you're looking at, some of your other like Wild Turkey, some of your other kind of higher rye mash bill brands. This one's going to be on the lower rye side, so usually that means a little bit more sweetness. So if you haven't seen any of my videos before, what I'm going to do is I'll grade the nose, the palate, the finish, and the value, all from a 0 to 10 grading scale. And then I'll just average them out at the end. Now, again, as a disclaimer, these are just my opinions, my nose, my palate. Things change all the time, even for me. So, this is kind of just a snapshot of my journey at this specific time on my exploration of whiskey. So, I hope you guys enjoy, and let's take a look at the color. This is something I don't grade, but it's just, something to look at. For being only a 4-year-old whiskey, and from what I can tell, the research I've done, this is only about 4 years. I don't think it has too much more age than that. There are some bottled and bond whiskeys that get up there in age, like 11 plus years, but a lot of the bottled and bonds tend to be in that 4 to 6 range. This has quite a bit of color for something that, supposedly is only 4 years. And again, being straight Kentucky bourbon whiskey, they can't put any coloring in it whatsoever. So, it could have just been maybe the heat cycle pulled more of the char from the barrel. I'm not really sure, but there's a decent amount of color. It's not pale whatsoever. So now let's go in for the nose. So right off the nose here, I'm getting just a lot of deep, dark sweetness. Now, it's kind of like a dark brown sugar, some molasses, some dark caramel in there. There is a little bit of citrus and a little bit of spice, but it's more so just that, kind of dark sugar, maybe like a burnt sugar almost, or caramelized sugar. That's a really good nose. I'm really liking this one. It definitely lends to be more of a sweeter one so far on the nose. The sweetness is definitely outweighing the spice on this one. Let's go in for the palate now. Cheers, guys. Now there is a little bit more spice coming out in the palate than I was getting on the nose, which sometimes can happen. And that's definitely the case on this one. There is still a lot of that sweetness up front. The spice is kind of, I don't want to talk about the finish quite yet, but it's definitely more on the back end that spice kind of comes in. That initial hit right in front is definitely more of the dark brown sugars, the caramel, molasses, things like that. There is a little bit of oak presence, and there's a little bit of honey, and again, that citrus kind of poking its head in there, but this is just kind of a really well-balanced bourbon that leans on the sweeter side, if that makes any sense. So again, with that lower rye mash bill, it's definitely in the sweeter category, I would say, but it has just enough spice to where it's not like overly sweet. I have had some whiskeys that have been just too sweet to the point where they're almost like a liqueur, and that to me is just off-putting. That's just too sweet. I like a little bit of balance there. You know, it can lean a little bit more in the rye spiciness side of things. I do like a good rye. It can lean more into the sweetness, but it's got to be somewhere in between there. I don't like it when it's just on one end of the spectrum only. All right, so actually I'm going to grade the nose now, since I've both nosed it and tasted it. So this is a really pleasant nose. I'm really liking this one. As you can tell, the bottle is, you know, kind of getting down there to the halfway mark. So I've had a chance to let it open up a little bit. That might be bringing some of that sweetness in a little bit. There's nothing wrong with the nose on this one. You know, as long as you don't hate sweeter bourbons, I think you'd enjoy this. There isn't a ton of complexity though. There's enough going on that, you know, you can pick out some different things, but it's definitely not the most complex thing I've ever nosed. And I'll get to the price point a little bit later, but you know, for the price point, this nose is fantastic. I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. All right, so now let's grade the palate. Yeah, so again, I'm gonna use the word well-balanced because I think that's what this is. It's not the craziest palate. You know, it has 100 proof, so I think it, you know, to me, that's right in my wheelhouse of what I tend to like. You have some proof hounds that like things in the 115 plus range or barrel proof only. You got some people that like it more in the bottom range of it, you know, the kind of that 40 to 46 proof range. This is kind of right in the middle, so to me, this is where I like it. There's just, like I said, there's a nice complexity of kind of that dark sweetness mixed with a little bit of spice. I'm gonna have to give the palate a good solid 7 on this as well. I don't want to, you know, rate this too high because again, this isn't blowing me away by any means, but you know, for being what I consider a daily sipper at this point, this is really fantastic. Does lean more toward the sweet side, which I tend to enjoy. So this to me is going to be definitely bumping it up, you know, ahead of just straight right down the middle 5. This is a good one to drink for me. All right, so now let's get into the finish. Now the finish are the flavors that are going to be lingering after a while after you've had it. And then also I'll talk about the length too. And that's just about how long the flavors last after you've drank it. So I'm going for another sip. So I put the length on this as a medium long finish. I think between the proof and it having just enough spice and citrus there to kind of carry those flavors through, this one tends, at least to me, to last a little bit longer. It doesn't just disappear right away. You definitely get a lot more of that spice, citrus, baking spices, you know, things like, there's a lot of cinnamon on this one. I'm getting some clove and nutmeg, kind of your typical baking spice package with bourbon. That's what you're gonna get with this one. And that definitely shows up on the tail end of things. So, you know, once that sweetness kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit and dissipates, then you're left with that nice balance of spice with a little bit of oak too. I think the oak you definitely pick up on the tail end once that sweetness goes away after a little bit. It is a good finish and it is reasonably long. So I don't want to make this like overly complicated, I guess, but we'll give this one a 7 as well on the finish. I think this is, again, just really, you know, kind of hitting all the right things. Again, not blowing me away or blowing me out of the water, but this is just consistently good so far, you know, in every single category. All right, so now we're gonna get into the value, which I think with this bottle here, you can't not talk about the value. To me, this is almost a flagship bourbon in the daily drinker or daily sipper category. So this is, from what I can gather, this is $25 MSRP. You might see it for upwards of $30, but keep in mind this is for 1 liter. Now, I don't believe they sell this in 750 milliliter bottles. As far as I can tell, this is just in 1 liter bottles only. Now, it's only available in 15 states because, again, it's only been around since about 2017, but they've been trying to roll it out in some other states, again, from what I've been reading online. So it's kind of limited availability. I believe you can find it probably online if you can have liquor, distributed or mailed to your state of residence. You can probably get it online that way, but the closest state that we have this in is Illinois. It's not in Wisconsin yet, but thankfully I live close enough to the Illinois-Wisconsin border that it's not a problem for me to get this on occasion. So again, 25 to 30 bucks for 1 liter, I think is really good for 100 proof, 4-year, just a nice, sweet, good sipping bourbon. The only thing, like I said, I would knock is maybe the limited availability. It's not everywhere right now. I hope that they keep the price where it is because really that's the only thing that's making this really stand out of the crowd. If this were priced at 45 bucks for a liter, I don't think many people would be buying it at that point. This has become pretty popular in the whiskey community and the whiskey crowd just because of how consistent it is and how good it is for the price. So, I think value, I would give this an 8.5 right now just because of all of those things. Even with that limited availability, I think this is just a very good bargain and you get a lot of bang for your buck on this one. So if my calculations are correct, that brings the total to 7.375 out of 10, which I think is a really good score for this. Again, you're paying 25 to 30 bucks for 1 liter. You could mix this, it would go easy. I think the flavors might get maybe muted in some cocktails just because of how well-rounded and kind of on the sweeter end of the spectrum it is, but you could still try adding it to cocktails. Sipping it by itself is neat. I think you could put a rock in the glass, drink this on the rocks. It would hold up to that with 100 proof. It's really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very versatile whiskey, right? You can pretty much do anything with it, and it's 25 to 30 bucks. So if you see this and you've never tried it before, for that price, I don't think you can afford not to. If you only like rye, if you only like super spicy stuff, or only like cask strength stuff at that point, then maybe pass on it. But otherwise, I think you should give this a try. I think this is a fantastic bottle. I don't think this will be around too much longer in my bar. I've been going to it. Again, it's just, it is a good sipper. So thanks again for watching, guys. I'll put my Instagram and Patreon links down below in the descriptions. Any support, whether it's watching this, going to my Instagram page, any comments you guys leave, that's all fantastic, and I really do appreciate that. So thanks for watching, and yeah, go get some Early Times Bottled and Bond. All right, keep on sipping. Cheers.